The engines cut
I
at
can't believe
exactly
they're gone.
4:57 in
I
the
know.
morning.
This brings
One
it all
moment,
back.
the street
It
was
does.
filled with sound, deep rolling.
All right, the route is
kind of
set.
sound
We hit
that
the
you felt
warehouse
in
at
your
dawn.
sternum
Perimeter's
before
clear.
you
We're
heard it
ready.
with your
Good.
ears,
Let's move.
and then silence dropped over Juniper Street like a curtain coming down. 55 motorcycles, all of them still. The riders sat on their bikes without moving, and in the gray pre-dawn light of Flagstaff, Arizona, they looked like something carved from the landscape itself. Patient, permanent, immovable. Cole Decker sat at the front of the line and looked at the house. It was a modest house. Single-story, pale yellow siding that had faded to something closer to cream, over the decades a covered porch with two wooden chairs that had weathered more seasons than most of the riders behind him had been alive. A garden along the front walk, rosemary and lavender, and something with small white flowers that Cole couldn't name that even in the October darkness had the look of something carefully tended. Loved. The maple tree at the edge of the property had gone deep amber with the season, and a few leaves moved in the pre-dawn air, catching what little light there was. The lights inside were on. That was the thing that settled it in Cole's chest, the thing that moved him from the motorcycle to the pavement, with the specific deliberateness of the man who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. The lights were on at 4:57 in the morning, which meant that Dorothy Calloway had not slept, which meant that whatever was happening inside that house had been happening long enough and badly enough to cost a 76-year-old woman her sleep on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday in October. He walked up the front path. Behind him, he heard boots touching pavement. Dana Beckett, Marcus Holt, 6 others fanning out to positions they had agreed on the night before. The rest stayed on their bikes, watching the street, watching the neighboring houses beginning slowly to register the presence of something unusual. A light coming on across the way, a curtain moving 2 houses down. Cole stepped onto the porch and tried the door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The kitchen was at the back of the house and he could see it from the entry, the light pouring out into the hallway, the shape of a table paper spread across it, white and official looking. He walked toward it and stopped in the kitchen doorway. Garrett Calloway stood behind his mother's chair. He was 47 years old, well-dressed even at this hour, pressed slacks, a collared shirt, the careful presentation of a man who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He had one hand resting on his mother's shoulder. The touch was light, almost gentle, the way you might rest a hand on something fragile to keep it from moving. Dorothy Calloway sat at the kitchen table with a pen in her hand and papers in front of her and tears tracking silently down her face. She was 76 years old, silver-haired, small-framed, with the upright posture of someone who had spent 3 decades on their feet in hospital corridors and had never quite lost the habit of standing straight. Her hands were the hands of a nurse, capable, precise, marked by years of work. The hand holding the pen was trembling. A second man stood near the kitchen counter, mid-50s suit jacket, a leather briefcase at his feet. He had the smooth, professional manner of someone who facilitated difficult transactions and had learned to make difficulty look routine. His name was Harmon Price, and Cole didn't know it yet, but he would. Garrett looked up when Cole appeared in the doorway. His face moved through surprise, then irritation, then settled into something controlled and careful. "You need to leave," Garrett said. "This is private property." Cole looked at him, then he looked at Dorothy Calloway. Her eyes had come up from the papers when he appeared, and in them he saw something that he recognized, not because he had seen it in her specifically, but because he had seen it in people who had been worn down for a longer time by something they couldn't name to anyone who would believe them. It was the look of someone who had stopped expecting to be heard. Then she saw the jacket, the Iron Wolf's jacket, black leather, the wolf head patch on the chest that Ray Calloway had worn for 18 years. Her eyes moved from Cole's face to the patch and back to his face, and something happened in her expression. Something small and enormous, at the same time like a door that has been stuck for a very long time, shifting just slightly in its frame. "Step away from her," Cole said. Garrett's jaw tightened. "I don't know who you are, but this is a family matter, and you have absolutely no right." "Is that what you call it?" Cole said. It wasn't a question. He walked into the kitchen and stood at the end of the table and looked down at the papers spread across it. Power of attorney, financial authorization, a document with the letterhead of something called Sunrise Ridge Care. His eyes moved over them without touching them. "Signing papers at 5 in the morning, while she's crying." My mother has agreed to all of this, Garrett said. The patient voice, the gentle voice. Cole had been briefed on the voice. She's been struggling to manage on her own, and we've made a plan together that's best for her long-term well-being. I understand it might look... Dana, Cole said. Dana Beckett moved past him into the kitchen, her phone already out, already photographing. Every page, every signature line, every official stamp and header and date. She moved quickly and quietly, and Garrett watched her with an expression that was trying to stay composed and was not entirely succeeding. You can't just... Garrett started. The door was unlocked, Cole said. We're here because your mother's neighbor asked us to come. He pulled out a chair across from Dorothy and sat down. Not looming, not threatening, just present, eye level. He looked at Dorothy directly. Mrs. Calloway, do you want to sign these papers? Dorothy looked at the papers. She looked at her son's hand on her shoulder. She looked at Cole. She opened her mouth. Mom is having a hard morning, Garrett said immediately. His hand on her shoulder pressed down just slightly, the smallest possible increase in pressure, the kind that was nearly invisible and entirely deliberate. She's been confused and upset, and these men coming in here is making things considerably worse. Mrs. Calloway, Cole said again, do you want to sign these papers? Dorothy Calloway looked at him. I want to stay in my home, she said. Her voice was quiet. It shook at the edges, but it was clear. Garrett started to speak again, and Cole looked at him, just looked at him, and something in that look closed Garrett's mouth as efficiently as a hand. Cole had been a Marine. He knew how to occupy a room without filling it with noise. He knew the difference between the threat you announced and the one you simply were, and he knew which one carried more weight. Outside through the kitchen window, the street was beginning to lighten. Dawn still 20 minutes away, but the darkness thinning at the edges, the sky moving from black to the deep blue-gray that preceded color. And in that light visible from where Dorothy sat the Iron Wolves, 54 riders still on their bikes, still watching, still waiting. Dorothy looked at them through the window, and Harmon Price, who had said nothing since Cole arrived, who had been calculating angles and outcomes from his position near the counter, picked up his briefcase and said, I think perhaps we should reschedule. You're not going anywhere yet, Marcus Holt said from the kitchen doorway. Marcus had the specific authority of a man who had spent 28 years as county sheriff, the kind of authority that didn't require volume or posture, that simply existed in the room the moment he entered it. Price looked at Marcus, did the rapid calculation that people tended to do when they encountered someone like that, and set the briefcase back down. Garrett looked at the window, at the riders, at Cole, at his mother. For the first time, the composed surface showed something underneath. Not remorse, not guilt. Something colder and more pragmatic, the expression of a man recalculating the distance between where he was and where the exits were. I'm going to call the police, Garrett said. Go ahead, Cole said. They'll want to look at these documents. Cole Decker had turned 58 in September in the same garage on the south side of Flagstaff, where he had turned 40 and 45 and 50 each birthday, more or less indistinguishable from the others in its lack of ceremony. He did not celebrate birthdays. He marked them the same way he marked most things, by showing up to work, doing what needed doing, and going home. He had been running Decker's Iron for 22 years, and in that time he had built it from a two-bay garage with a leaking roof into something that 12 people depended on for their livelihoods, and that the motorcycle community of northern Arizona depended on for the kind of mechanical work that required both competence and honesty, which combination was rarer than it should have been. He had been a Marine before that, 2 tours. He didn't talk about it, not because it had broken him, it hadn't quite, but because he found that the people who wanted to talk about it most were generally the people who understood it least, and the conversations tended to go in circles that he had no interest in traveling. He had been Iron Wolves before that, and during that, and after that, because Iron Wolves was not a phase or a period of his life, but a permanent condition of it, the way certain things are permanent, bone-deep, weatherproof, not subject to revision. Ray Calloway had been part of that permanence for 18 years. They had met at a rally outside Sedona in the fall of the year that Cole turned 42 men who had each been riding alone long enough to have developed opinions about it, and who recognized in each other the specific quality of person who would make a good riding companion, present, but not intrusive, reliable, but not rigid, capable of extended silence without making the silence uncomfortable. They had ridden together that weekend and discovered somewhere in the second 100 miles that they were also capable of extended conversation and that the conversation was worth having. Ray was 10 years older than Cole. He had a wife he loved completely and a son he was working hard to understand, in a way of looking at the landscape while he rode that made Cole think of the word grateful. Not the performed gratitude of people who had been told they should feel it, but the quiet organic kind that came from actually paying attention to what you had. 18 years. They had logged more miles together than Cole could calculate. They had sat in more parking lots and diners and roadside pullouts than he could count, talking about everything and nothing. They had shown up for each other in the specific ways that men who have ridden together for a long time show up, not with declarations but with presence, not with speeches but with the simple fact of being there when being there was what was needed. Ray had been diagnosed 14 months before he died. Pancreatic cancer, which was the kind that didn't offer much negotiation. He had handled the diagnosis the way he handled most things, with a directness that some people mistook for stoicism, but was actually something different, something more active. He was not pretending it wasn't happening. He was deciding what to do with the time he had left and doing it. Cole had been there for most of the last months, at the hospice at the house on Juniper Street, during the weeks when Ray was still well enough to sit on his own porch. He had sat with Ray through nights when the morphine wasn't enough and there was nothing to do but be present, which was what Ray had asked of him and what Cole had given without reservation. And on a September afternoon, 11 weeks before the end, sitting on a bench outside the hospice ward, with Humphreys Peak rising enormous and snow-capped in the distance, Ray had told him what he needed to know. He told Cole about Garrett's debt, $340,000 accumulated over 3 years of a real estate development deal that had collapsed and left his son financially destroyed. He told him about the $40,000 he had quietly given from his own retirement account, the secret he had kept from Dorothy and carried alone, and the shame that had come with carrying it. He told him about the second request 6 months later, which he had refused, and about how Garrett had mostly stopped coming around after that, and how the distance had broken something between them that Ray had spent his remaining months trying to repair from a distance and without the tools to do it properly. And then he told Cole what he had decided about the will. Nothing to Garrett, the house and the accounts and the life insurance to Dorothy, everything. Not as punishment, as protection. Because Ray had watched what money did to his son's relationship with the truth over the course of 3 years and had arrived at the conclusion that more money would not produce honesty, it would produce more creative dishonesty, and Dorothy would be standing in the path of it. Cole had asked if he was sure. Ray had looked at Humphreys Peak for a long moment before he answered. "I know Garrett," he had said. "I know what he's capable of when the pressure gets high enough. I've watched it build. And after I'm gone, the pressure doesn't go away. The debt is still there, the house is still there, and Dorothy is going to be alone. Alone means vulnerable. Garrett knows that better than anyone." His voice had been quiet, measured, the voice of a man who has thought about something for a long time and arrived somewhere he didn't want to be, but couldn't argue with. "I need someone watching, someone he can't talk around, someone who will show up when it matters and not be moved." Cole had said, "I'll be there." Ray had looked at him, then looked at him the way he looked at the mountain, with that quality of full attention that was one of the things Cole had valued most in 18 years of friendship. Then he had reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, already sealed, already addressed in his large forward-leaning script. "Give this to her when she needs it most," Ray had said. "You'll know when." Cole had carried it in the inner pocket of his jacket for 14 months. Through the funeral, where he had stood at the back and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the day wasn't already saying. Through the winter and the spring that followed, during which he had kept his distance from Juniper Street out of respect for Dorothy's grief, while watching from that distance with the patience he had learned in the Marines, complete stillness, complete readiness. And then Sylvia Pruitt had walked into his garage on a Monday afternoon 3 days before this morning, and the waiting had ended. Sylvia was 72 years old, a retired school teacher who had lived across the street from Dorothy Calloway for 3 decades, and who had since Ray's funeral maintained a quiet and consistent presence in Dot's life. Food brought over, company offered, the small, sustaining acts of a neighbor who understood what it meant to be seen. She was not a dramatic woman. She did not exaggerate. When she came into Decker's Iron with her hands clasped in front of her and the specific exhaustion of someone who had been worried for too long, Written clearly on her face, Cole had known before she spoke that what she was bringing him was real. She had told him about the garden first. Dot's garden is the thing I always look at in the morning, Sylvia had said. 30 years she was out there before 8 o'clock every season, no exceptions. You could set your watch by it. She paused, choosing words carefully. It's been dying for 3 weeks. I don't think she's been outside at all. Cole had listened without speaking the way he listened to everything completely, without preparing his response while the other person was still talking. Then Sylvia had told him about Garrett, the visits that had increased after the first anniversary of Ray's death, coming more frequently in a way that had initially seemed like a good thing and had gradually begun to feel like something that only resembled a good thing from a distance. The way Garrett spoke about Dorothy to the neighbors, always concerned, always gentle, and always with the particular precision of a man who was building a record. She's getting so forgetful. I'm worried about her. It's getting harder to manage. The visits to the bank. The conversations with her doctor that happened before Dorothy arrived, setting the context through which anything she said would subsequently be interpreted. And then the morning Sylvia had seen through the window. Papers on the kitchen table, she said. Garrett standing behind her, talking in that quiet, patient voice he uses. And Dot's face. She stopped. Dot is not a woman who cries easily. In 30 years, I have seen her cry twice. Once when Ray was diagnosed. Once at his funeral. She was crying. Cole had made 2 phone calls that afternoon. Dana Beckett and Marcus Holt. By 8 that evening, they had begun assembling what they knew. By midnight, the picture was clear enough and dark enough that waiting another day was not a reasonable option. Now standing in Dorothy Calloway's kitchen, with the papers on the table in front of him, and Garrett recalculating his options across the room, Cole understood exactly what he was looking at. Not just documents. A system. Months of careful, patient construction. The gentle voice, the concerned expression, the strategic word forgetful deployed with increasing frequency until the woman sitting in this chair had begun to doubt the testimony of her own memory against the consistent external narrative being built around her. Garrett Calloway had not always been this person. Cole had pieced that together from everything Ray had told him and everything Sylvia had filled in, and from the particular shape of the man standing in this kitchen, which was the shape of someone who had been one thing for a long time and had chosen at a specific crossroads to become something else. In the years before the debt, before the development deal, had collapsed and taken everything with it, he had been a different son. Ray had spoken of him with warmth when the subject was the past. The Garrett who called on Sunday evenings, who drove up from Phoenix for holidays, who had appeared at Juniper Street within 4 hours of his father's diagnosis and stayed for a week without being asked. That Garrett had been real. Cole did not doubt it. But 3 years of financial collapse had done something to him. Watching his credit and his savings and his marriage all move in the same direction simultaneously, with the debt number fixed and immovable in the background. The way a man recalculated when the pressure got high enough and the thing he needed was right there, and only one barrier remained between him and it. That barrier had been Ray while Ray was alive. After the funeral, Garrett had waited. 6 months of genuine presence, the flowers, the Sunday dinners, the concerned son, establishing himself in Dorothy's life, with what may have been real feeling alongside the calculation, the 2 things so thoroughly mixed by that point that perhaps even Garrett could no longer separate them reliably. And then in the 7th month, the word forgetful had appeared for the first time. The police arrived at 20 past 5. 2 patrol cars, 4 officers. The lead officer was a young man named Walcott, composed, cautious, with the particular professional care of someone who had walked into enough complicated domestic situations to have developed a policy of withholding judgment until he understood what he was actually looking at. He saw the 55 motorcycles on the street. He looked at the house. He came up the front path and into the kitchen and took in the full scene with the methodical attention of someone doing a job that required accuracy. Garrett moved toward him immediately. The transformation was complete and instantaneous. The calculating man vanished, replaced entirely by the devoted son, tired and worried and grateful that someone with authority had finally arrived to make sense of a situation that had gotten out of hand. "Officer, thank you for coming. My mother is elderly, and these men entered her home without permission. She's very upset. This whole situation has been incredibly distressing for her." The door was unlocked, Cole said from across the table. We were invited by her neighbor who was concerned for her safety. Officer Walcott looked at Dorothy. She had straightened in her chair with the professional composure of someone who had spent 30 years delivering difficult information to patients and their families and knew how to present herself clearly under pressure. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked at Garrett first. His hand had returned to her shoulder, that same light-calibrated pressure. The hand that said, without any words at all, that a version of the situation had already been established and that departing from it would be complicated in ways that weren't immediately apparent. She looked at Cole. He was watching her with the same stillness he had maintained since walking through the door, patient present. Not urging, she understood in the way she had understood things about people for 76 years without always being able to explain the mechanism that Cole Decker would not be disappointed in whatever she said, that he was simply there, which was exactly what Ray had told her in one of the last conversations they had ever had. "He told me someone would come," Ray had said, "if things got bad. I've made arrangements. You won't be alone." She had told herself it was the morphine. She had told herself it was the wishful thinking of a man who needed to believe the people he loved would be protected after he was gone. But Cole Decker had come at 4:57 in the morning, with 54 people behind him and Ray's patch on his chest. She opened her mouth to speak, and then Garrett did something Cole had not anticipated. He moved around the chair slowly, and he crouched down beside his mother, actually knelt one knee on the kitchen floor, bringing himself below her eye level, the posture of a suppliant, of a son, not a schemer. He took her hand in both of his. "Mom, he said very quietly, "it's okay, I'm here. You're safe now." And in his eyes, Cole saw it from across the table and recognized it for what it was. There was something that was not entirely performance, some residue of the person he had been, the son who had driven 4 hours when his father was diagnosed, the grief that lived underneath everything else buried, but not gone surfacing in this moment in a way that was genuine enough to be visible. Dorothy saw it too. Cole watched the recognition move across her face, watched it collide with 10 months of accumulated uncertainty, and he watched her hesitate. Less than a second. But it was enough. Officer Walcott made the assessment that officers made in situations like this one. The elderly woman was not in physical danger. The family member appeared genuinely concerned, and the 55 motorcycles on the street were a more visible and more manageable problem than the interpersonal dynamics of a family dispute at 5 in the morning. "Sir," he said to Cole, "I'm going to need you and your group to clear the street." Cole looked at Walcott. Then he looked at Dorothy one more time, held her gaze for a moment, not pressing, not asking, just present. And then he stood. He looked at Garrett, the look that communicated without any of the machinery of threat exactly what Cole Decker was and what he was prepared to do and how long he was prepared to wait to do it. Then he walked out of the kitchen through the hallway out the front door into the pre-dawn air. Dana followed. Marcus followed. One by one, the Iron Wolves remounted their bikes. Cole stood in the driveway for a moment. Through the kitchen window, he could see Dorothy sitting at the table with her son's hand on her shoulder and the papers still spread in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to his Road King and got on. The engine started, deep rolling, filling the street one more time, and then one by one they pulled away. Dorothy watched from the kitchen window until the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner onto 4th Street. The sound faded. The street was empty and ordinary. A Tuesday morning in October, nothing unusual about it, no evidence remaining that anything had happened here at all. Garrett stood and made tea. He moved through the kitchen with the ease of a man in a space he had already in his own mind begun to consider his own. When he set the cup in front of her, he was smiling the smile she had known her whole life and had spent 10 months learning to read differently. "See?" he said, his voice gentle and warm. "Everything's fine. We'll finish the paperwork in the morning when you've had some rest. The day after tomorrow, we'll go to see Sunrise Ridge. You're going to feel so much better once you've actually seen the place." Dorothy looked at the tea. She did not touch it. After Garrett left, the house settled into silence. Dorothy sat alone at the kitchen table with the papers in front of her and the pen her son had positioned precisely at her right hand. She looked at the pen for a long time. She thought about the moment she had hesitated. She thought about what she had seen in Garrett's eyes when he knelt beside her, the real grief underneath the calculation, the boy she had raised visible for just a second under the man he had become. She thought about Coldecker's eyes when he walked out, and what she had seen there, which was not anger and not judgment, but the steady patience of a man who had made a commitment and was prepared to honor it regardless of how long it took. She stood and walked through the house the way she had walked through it before Cole arrived, touching things, remembering. The door frame in the hallway with the pencil marks measuring Garrett's height every birthday from age 4 to 15, fading now but still legible. The cabinet in the dining room with her mother's china passed down through 3 generations. The chair by the living room window where Ray had died here at home the way he had wanted her hand in his. She went to the back door and stepped outside into the cold October dark. The garden was in front of her. 3 weeks of neglect had taken most of it. The annuals gone entirely, the perennials struggling, the beds showing bare soil in places she had never allowed to go bare in 30 years of tending them. She knelt in the dirt without thinking about it, her hands moving through the soil by the feel of long practice, and she worked her way along the lower beds in the darkness. And there in the section closest to the fence where the tomato plants grew lowest and she hadn't looked carefully in weeks, small green fruits dense and firm under her fingers. Still alive, growing in the places she had stopped checking. She stayed there for a long time, her hands in the soil, the October air cold and clean around her, the sky beginning at its very edges to lighten toward what would eventually become dawn. When she came back inside, she did not sit down. She walked directly to the kitchen table, picked up the pen her son had left, and looked at the signature line on the power of attorney. Then she drew a single straight line through it. Not a signature, a refusal, clean and deliberate. She put the pen down. She went to the window and looked at the empty street where 55 motorcycles had stood in the dark, and she thought about Ray telling her that he had made arrangements, that someone would come, that she would not be alone. She had not fully believed it. She had told herself it was the morphine or the need of a dying man to feel that everything would be taken care of. But he had come, with 54 people in Ray's patch on his chest. Ray had known. Outside the window the sky was turning, the specific amber and rose of a Flagstaff dawn, the color that she and Ray had stood at this window and watched more times than she could count, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say that the light wasn't already saying better. She was still here. Garrett thought he had won the night. But Dorothy Calloway had been a nurse for 30 years, and she understood the difference between a patient who had given up and a patient who was gathering themselves for what came next. She had been both at different points in her life, and she knew what each one felt like from the inside. This was gathering. She went to make coffee, and she waited for the day. The police left Juniper Street at 5:43 in the morning. By 6, Cole had made the call. By 7, all 55 had confirmed. By 9 that evening, they were in the parking lot behind the closed sundown gas station on Route 89, and the work had begun. The lot was dark except for the glow of 55 phone screens and the orange tips of 3 cigarettes. Cole Decker stood at the center, arms crossed, jaw set, watching Dana Beckett lay photographs across the hood of his Road King, like a surgeon arranging instruments before an operation that could not be postponed. "Give me what you have," Cole said. Dana was 41 years old, compact and precise, with the kind of stillness that came from 12 years processing loan fraud at First National before she walked away from it all and found something that felt more like family than any bank ever had. She had been with Iron Wolves for 9 years. Cole trusted her the way he trusted his own hands. "The signature on the power of attorney," Dana said, placing 2 photographs side by side under the beam of Marcus Holt's flashlight. "This one is from the document Garrett had Dot sign 3 weeks ago. This one is from the Christmas card she sent Sylvia Pruitt last December." She tapped both. "Look at the capital D. Look at the way she closes the loop on the C in Callaway." Marcus leaned in. He was 63, broad-shouldered, with a white beard that made him look like someone's grandfather. Until you looked at his eyes, the eyes of a man who had spent 28 years as county sheriff and had seen every variety of human wrongdoing that Arizona could produce. "They're not even close," he said. "Not even close," Dana confirmed. "The signature on the power of attorney is shakier. Smaller, the letters don't connect the same way. Either she signed it under extreme duress or she didn't sign it at all." "She didn't sign it," said a voice from the edge of the group. Weston, 34, the youngest full member of Iron Wolves, was crouched against his bike with a laptop balanced on his knee. "Or if she did," somebody guided her hand. "I pulled the public filing on the notarization. Theodore Greer Notary, public license number 4471-AZ. "That name," Marcus said. You know it. I know it. Theodore Greer lost his license in August. State board pulled it after he notarized 3 fraudulent property transfers in a Scottsdale development deal. The case is still in civil litigation. Marcus straightened. He's been operating illegally for 4 months. The group went quiet. 55 people in the Arizona dark, the distant sound of a freight train moving through the valley below, the smell of cooling asphalt and pine coming down from the mountains. Cole spoke first. What else? The LLC, Dana said, pulling up another document on her phone. The $12,000 that left Dot's checking account in September. I traced it to a limited liability company registered in Nevada, Callaway Property Solutions, filed 8 months ago. She looked up. 8 months ago was 1 month after Ray's funeral. He started planning before he even finished grieving, someone said from the back. He may have started before Ray died, Dana said, and no one in the group disputed that. Cole walked a slow circle thinking, movement, not stillness. This was how he processed how he always had. Ray used to say Cole was like a diesel engine he needed to be running to think clearly. Garrett's taking her to tour Sunrise Ridge Care tomorrow morning, Cole said. He mentioned the 10 o'clock appointment to Sylvia. That means he picks Dot up around 8:39 at the latest. He stopped walking. That gives us tonight. To do what? Weston asked. To build something that can't be undone, Cole said. Not just signature comparisons. A complete case, bank records, notary fraud, documentation, and everything we can learn about what Garrett actually told that nursing home. He looked at Dana. Call Sunrise Ridge tonight. Present yourself as a family member, researching placement options. Ask about their memory care unit. Ask about communication policies, visitor access, how contact with the outside world is managed for residents in their secured units. Find out what their standard protocols are. He paused. Don't ask about Dot specifically. You don't need to. The policies will tell you what she was walking into. Dana nodded and moved away from the group with her phone. I'll write up a formal affidavit on the notary violation, Marcus said. My contact at the state licensing board answers at 7 in the morning. Do it, Cole said, and call the DA's office investigator you working with. Not to file yet, just to make sure she's aware and ready to mute her when we hand her the package. He looked around at the 54 remaining faces. Nobody goes home, he said. We work through the night. The call to Sunrise Ridge Care took 11 minutes. Dana stood apart from the group, her voice smooth and professional, asking the questions a concerned family member would ask when researching options for an aging parent. She asked about levels of care. She asked about their secured memory unit and the protocols that govern daily life there. She asked about communication, how residents stayed in contact with family and friends, what the visiting policies were, whether residents had access to phones. The night coordinator answered carefully and thoroughly, the way staff were trained to answer prospective family inquiries, explaining policies rather than discussing any specific resident. What she described was a unit where all outside communication was mediated through the designated legal guardian. Residents in the secured wing did not have independent phone access. Visitor approvals were processed through the primary family contact on file. Incoming mail was reviewed before delivery. The structure existed, the coordinator explained, to protect residents from confusion and distress. Dana thanked her and ended the call. She stood with her phone in her hand for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then she walked back to Cole. If Garrett has power of attorney and is listed as sole guardian, she said, Dot goes in and the door closes behind her. She can't call anyone who isn't on his approved list. She can't receive visitors he hasn't authorized. Correspondence goes through him. She paused. She disappears, completely and legally. The silence that settled over the group after that was a different kind of silence from the ones before it. It had weight, the kind you felt in your chest. That's not a nursing home placement, Marcus said, his voice very quiet. That's a disappearing act. He wasn't just trying to get her money, Weston said slowly. He was trying to make sure she could never tell anyone what he'd done. Both, Cole said. It's both. He looked at the mountain dark against the night sky. Build the case. Everything we have. By morning. They worked through the night in the parking lot of a closed gas station on Route 89. Dana's contact at First National came through at midnight, a summary of account activity that documented 3 transfers in 60 days, $4,200 to Callaway Properties. Solutions, $7,800 to a holding company registered in Delaware, and a $340 charge to a Phoenix law firm that specialized, according to its website, in elder care transition planning. The financial trail was clean and complete and entirely damning. Marcus drafted his affidavit on his phone, documented the notary violation with supporting records from the state licensing board database, and spent an hour on the phone with a DA's office investigator named Paulson, whom he had worked alongside for 6 years before retirement. Paulson couldn't move on anything until he had the formal package in hand, but he listened to everything Marcus told him, and his listening had a quality that Marcus recognized from 28 years of law enforcement as the listening of someone who intended to act. Weston ran background on Harmon Price and found what background checks on men like Price tended to find a record of facilitation that existed just below the threshold of illegality. 14 complaints filed with the Arizona Department of Health Services out of 47 placements in 2 years. 3 of those complaints originating from residents themselves before they were transferred to facilities where further complaints became logistically difficult. By 2 in the morning, they had enough. By 4, they had more than enough, and Cole sat on the hood of his Road King in the quiet of the gas station lot with the desert air cool and clean around him, thinking about what tomorrow would require and whether he had everything he needed to deliver it. He thought about Ray the way he thought about him at moments that mattered not with grief, exactly which had softened over 14 months into something that was present, but no longer sharp, but with the specific weight of his debt that had been given freely and was being repaid in the only currency that had ever mattered between them. He had made a promise. Tomorrow he would finish keeping it. He got off the hood, walked to the center of the group and said, "Get some sleep if you can. 2 hours. We move at 8. At 8:45 in the morning, Garrett Calloway pulled into the driveway of the house on Juniper Street. He was early. He was always early when something mattered to him. Dorothy was sitting at the kitchen table when she heard his key in the lock. She hadn't slept. She had spent the hours between 4 and dawn in the garden, and then in the house moving through the rooms, and when the light came up, she had made coffee and sat at the table with her hands around the mug and waited with the particular composure of someone who has made their decision and is simply waiting for events to catch up to it. "Morning, Mom." Garrett came in with a brown paper bag. "Brought you a blueberry muffin." "I'm not hungry." He set it on the table anyway. "We should leave in about 15 minutes. Traffic on 89 can get unpredictable." "I don't want to go." Garrett sat down across from her. He reached across the table and took her hands in the way he had learned to do the gesture of a caring son that had become over 10 months something she had learned to read very differently. His face was composed, gentle, the face she had loved for 47 years and had spent the last 10 months understanding in a new and unwelcome way. "Mom," he said, "I know how much this house means to you. I know how hard change is, but I'm genuinely frightened for you. You've been alone here for over a year, and every single day I worry about what could happen." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." The patient voice, practiced and smooth. "You need more support than you're getting here." "I'm not confused," Dorothy said. She looked at him steadily, the look of a woman who had delivered difficult information to patients and families for 3 decades and knew how to hold someone's gaze through an uncomfortable truth. "I have spent 30 years tracking medications, dosages, patient histories, emergency protocols. My mind is not the problem in this room, Garrett, and we both know it." Garrett released her hands. He stood and checked his watch. "We need to go. I need you to hear what I'm saying." "I hear you." He moved toward the door with the calm certainty of a man who has already decided how this morning ends. "Get your coat." Dorothy did not move. Garrett turned back. The careful gentleness slipped at the edges just slightly, the way it did when the script ran out. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Your father would be ashamed of you." The words dropped into the room like something heavy and irreversible. Garrett went completely still. "I mean that," Dorothy said. "Your father spent 43 years building something real with me. This house, this life. He worked himself to the bone so that we would have something solid to stand on. And you are dismantling it for money you lost on a deal that went wrong." Her voice did not waver. "He would not recognize the person standing in my kitchen right now." Something moved across Garrett's face, complicated and uncontrolled, the first genuinely unguarded expression she had seen from him in months. For just a moment, something real was there. Something that looked like the grief of a man who knew exactly how far he had traveled. from who he used to be. Then it closed. Dad is gone, he said flatly, and I'm the one who has to live in the actual world. Get your coat. He opened the front door. The engine started. 55 motorcycles had been in position since 7 that morning. Side streets, the alley behind the dry cleaner 2 blocks east, the parking lot of the hardware store at the corner of Juniper and 4th, distributed silent waiting with the patience that came from 22 miles of desert, riding in the pre-dawn dark to get into position before 8 o'clock. When Weston positioned in the coffee shop on the corner with a clear sightline to the driveway, sent the one-word text, they moved. 40 seconds. That was all it took for 55 motorcycles to converge from 4 directions and fill every available lane at the intersection of Juniper and 4th Street. Garrett's silver Audi hit the brakes hard. Dorothy lurched against her seatbelt. The sound of 55 engines was enormous. And then precisely and deliberately, it stopped. All of them at once. The silence that followed was almost louder than the noise had been, the specific silence of 55 people who had made a decision and were prepared to stand by it. Cole stepped off his Road King and walked to Garrett's window. He knocked once. Even. Patient. Garrett stared through the windshield at the wall of motorcycles and did not move. Cole knocked again. Harder. You're harassing us, Garrett said through the glass. I'm calling the police right now. Call them, Cole said, his voice carried easily through the window. We'll be here when they arrive. Garrett picked up his phone. His hands were not as steady as he needed them to be. Cole could see it from outside the glass, the small, controlled tremors of a man watching everything he had planned and built begin to come apart at the intersections. On the passenger side, Dana Beckett approached with her hands visible and her posture open and unhurried, the walk of someone who posed no threat and intended none. She crouched at window level. Through the glass, she could see Dorothy sitting very still, her eyes moving between Cole's face and the rider spread across the road ahead. Dana tapped the window lightly. Once. Dorothy turned toward her. Dana smiled, the real smile, not the professional one. She raised her open hand. It's okay. Dorothy looked at her for a moment. Then she reached for the door lock. Don't, Garrett said sharply without looking at her. Don't you dare open that door. Dorothy unlocked the door and pushed it open. Dana was there immediately, placing herself in the gap, creating space between Dorothy and anything Garrett might do. Mrs. Calloway, Dana said quietly, do you want to go to this facility today? Dorothy stepped out of the car. She stood on the asphalt of 4th Street in her coat and her good shoes, 76 years old, silver-haired, and entirely steady on her feet. She looked at Cole, who had moved away from Garrett's window and was watching her from a few feet away. She looked at the 54 riders still sitting on their bikes in the morning light, blocking the road in every direction. She looked at the mountain in the distance, Humphreys Peak, the mountain she had looked at from her kitchen window for 43 years. No, she said, I don't want to go. Did you ask to take this trip this morning? No. Do you want to leave your home? No, she said, I want to go home. Garrett got out of the car. The gray jacket, the pressed slacks, the careful presentation, all of it still intact on the surface. But the surface itself was different now, visibly strained in the way that things strain just before they gave way. She's confused, he said. She doesn't understand what she's agreeing to or refusing. This is a medical situation, and you are interfering in something that requires professional. She said no 3 times, Cole said, in complete sentences, without hesitation or confusion. He reached into his jacket and brought out his phone, holding it up so Garrett could see the photographs on the screen. You want to talk about the power of attorney with the notary stamp from a man who lost his license for fraud 4 months ago. The $12,000 that moved from her account to a Nevada LLC you registered 1 month after your father's funeral. Garrett's jaw tightened. The admission paperwork you filed with Sunrise Ridge Care, Dana said, stepping forward, her own phone raised. Describing your mother as having late-stage dementia with a history of self-harm and aggression, requesting that all outside communications go exclusively through you, no independent phone access, no visitors without your written approval. She looked at him steadily. That's not a nursing home placement. That's a CIA. Elder abuse under Arizona Statute 46-456. Marcus said, moving forward from the group with the measured authority of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades naming things for what they were. Financial exploitation under 13-1802 and the fraudulent notarization creates separate criminal exposure. He paused. I spent 28 years as county sheriff. I've watched cases like this go to trial. I know exactly what a prosecutor does with a file like the one we built last night. You have no legal standing here, Garrett said. His voice had lost the patient gentleness entirely now. You're right, Marcus said. I don't. The DA's investigator I spoke to at 6 this morning does. She's reviewing the file right now. Garrett looked at his mother. She was standing beside Dana with her arms at her sides, watching him with an expression he had not seen from her in the 10 months he had been systematically dismantling her sense of reality. She was not afraid. She was not pleading. She was not confused. She was watching him with the clear, settled eyes of a woman who had made her decision and was done revising it. Something moved through his face. The last infrastructure of the performance came down, and what was left underneath was just a man exhausted, cornered, stripped of the narrative he had been sustaining for nearly a year. I needed it, he said. His voice was different, lower, stripped of its professional polish. You have no idea what the last 3 years have been. The investment collapsed, and it took everything with it. My credit, my savings, everything I'd built. My wife left. I had nothing left. He stopped. His throat worked. And there it was, the house, the accounts, Dad's insurance. Just sitting there, and I thought, stop, Dorothy said. He stopped. I know what you thought, she said. Her voice was the voice she had used for 30 years when the moment required absolute clarity, the voice that had delivered diagnoses and prognoses and hard truths to people who needed to hear them and deserved to hear them without softening. I understand the calculation. I understand that you were desperate and that you couldn't see another way. She paused. What I won't accept is you standing in front of me pretending you had no choice. You had a choice from the first moment. You could have come to me and asked for help, and you have always known that I would have given it. I would have given you everything I could. Another pause. You chose not to ask. You chose to take instead. That was a choice. Garrett looked at the ground. Get in your car, Dorothy said. Go home. For a long moment, he didn't move. Cole watched him, watched the internal collapse of a man who had spent 10 months telling himself a story about what he was doing and why watching that story fall apart in the middle of a public intersection on a Tuesday morning in October with 55 witnesses and nowhere to go. Then Garrett picked up his phone from the roof of the Audi where he had set it, got back in the car, and drove away. Cole watched until the silver car disappeared. Then he turned. Dorothy was already walking back up Juniper Street, walking steadily without looking back toward home. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, Garrett came back. He did not come alone. He brought 2 attorneys from a Phoenix firm, one older silver-haired with the expensive composure of 40 years at the bar. One younger, a woman in her 30s, whose quiet competence was evident in the way she carried herself. He brought 3 private security contractors in identical dark jackets. And he brought a document that changed the weight of the room the moment Cole saw it. An emergency guardianship order, signed by a judge at 8 that morning. Cole had arrived 4 minutes after Dorothy called him 4 minutes because that was how long it took to cover the distance from Decker's Iron to Juniper Street at the speed he drove it. He came through the front door to find the attorneys already inside the security contractors in the hallway and Dorothy standing at her kitchen counter with her back against it in the stillness of someone who has planted her feet and does not intend to move them, but is not certain how long she can hold that position. The court signed the order yesterday evening, the older attorney was explaining when Cole entered. Emergency proceedings were conducted this morning based on evidence of cognitive decline and the immediate safety risk presented by what evidence, Cole said. The younger attorney opened her briefcase and produced a document. Medical evaluation, official letterhead, the Office of Dr. Leonard Ashby, Clinical Neuropsychologist, dated October 3rd. The evaluation described in precise clinical language a patient demonstrating significant memory impairment, impaired executive function, inability to manage personal finances, or make consistent medical decisions independently. The patient's name was Dorothy Calloway. Dr. Ashby evaluated her on October 3rd, Dana said from behind Cole. She was already photographing the document. According to the report, the younger attorney said, he conducted this evaluation in person, face-to-face with the patient. That's what the report states. Dana stepped away and dialed. She put the call on speaker without asking anyone's permission. 2 rings. Ashby Neuropsychology Group. How can I help you? Good morning. I need to verify details about a patient evaluation conducted by Dr. Ashby on October 3rd. A brief pause. I'm sorry I can't help you with that. Dr. Ashby is currently on leave. On leave since when? Since September 14th. He had cardiac surgery. He won't be returning to practice until the new year at the earliest. So the practice has conducted no patient evaluations since September 14th. That's correct. Everything has been suspended pending his recovery. If you need a referral, no, thank you. Dana ended the call. The kitchen was very quiet. The younger attorney looked at the evaluation in her hands. Then she looked at Garrett. Cole watched her face perform the rapid professional calculation of someone who had just understood that the ground beneath a case was not what she had been told it was. The evaluation is dated October 3rd, Cole said. The doctor has been unavailable since September 14th. He couldn't have written it. He looked at Garrett directly. Someone wrote it for him, used his letterhead, used his name, and you presented that fabricated document to a judge to obtain an emergency guardianship order. He paused. That's fraud upon the court. It's also, Marcus said, stepping through the front door he had arrived 30 seconds behind Cole. Grounds to void the guardianship order entirely. Ab initio, as if it never existed. He looked at the older attorney with the level gaze of someone who had spent 28 years in the same professional universe. And depending on what these attorneys knew and when they knew it, there may be bar exposure to consider. The older attorney looked at his younger colleague. Something passed between them, quick, decisive, the communication of 2 professionals who had just arrived at the same conclusion by the same route. They stepped into the hallway together. Cole could see them through the doorway. Low voices, the younger attorney gesturing with the fraudulent evaluation, the older man listening with his eyes closed. 90 seconds. When they came back, the older attorney addressed Garrett. We're withdrawing from this matter effective immediately. He turned briefly to Dorothy. Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. We were given incomplete information. He picked up his briefcase and walked out. The younger attorney followed. The security contractors, without the legal framework that had given their presence meaning, filed out after them. Garrett stood alone in his mother's kitchen. The gray jacket, the pressed slacks, the careful presentation that had been the armor of the concerned son for 10 months, now stripped of everything that had made it functional. What was left was just a man holding a piece of paper that no longer meant anything in a room that had never belonged to him, at the end of something that had never been going to end any other way. I needed it, he said, the hollow voice of someone whose story has run out. I needed it, and I couldn't see any other. Stop. Dorothy's voice was quiet, not angry, quieter than anger, which carries a kind of heat that this did not. You have said everything you need to say. I've heard it. She looked at her son for a long moment, the jawline that was raised, the eyes that were her own, the face she had known since the moment it existed. Your father left you nothing in the will because he understood what was in you. He didn't want to believe it. He hoped he was wrong. He asked Cole to come because he knew he might not be. She paused. He wasn't wrong. Garrett said nothing. The DA's office has everything, Dorothy said. The bank records, the notary, the fabricated evaluation, every dollar you moved. If you come back to this house, you will be arrested. That is not a threat from these men. It is the consequence of the choices you made, and you made them. Garrett looked at her one more time, looked at her the way a person looked at something they were trying to memorize and couldn't explain why, and then looked away quickly the way you looked away from things that were too close and too true to hold your gaze. He walked to the door. Garrett, Dorothy said. He stopped with his back to her. I'm your mother, she said. Nothing you did changes that. But nothing it changes what you did either. A pause that had the weight of a long life in it. Go. He went. Cole stood in the kitchen after the sound of the Audi faded into the distance. The voided guardianship order lay on the kitchen table. Dorothy stood at the counter, both hands gripping the edge for just a moment, the first involuntary movement she had made in the last hour. Then she released it. She turned to Cole. Is it over? She asked. The part that happens in this house is over, Cole said. The legal part will run its course. Marcus is going to walk the DA's office through everything today. There'll be an investigation. Harmon Price will be looked at, the placement agency has a history, and there's documentation to support a serious inquiry. And Garrett, that depends on him, Cole said. He knows what's waiting for him if he stays in Arizona. Dorothy nodded slowly. She looked around her kitchen, the stove where she had cooked 30 years of meals at the window that faced the garden, the table where Ray had read the newspaper every morning for 43 years. I want to go look at my garden, she said. Go ahead, Cole said. She walked past him and through the back door into the October morning. Cole stood at the kitchen window and watched her cross the yard to the garden bed. Watched her kneel in the soil with the ease of someone whose body remembered exactly how to do this even after weeks of not doing it. Watched her hands move through the dirt with a steadiness that had been missing for 10 months. She had said what needed to be said. She had made the decisions that were hers to make. She had not needed Cole to speak for her or act for her. She had needed him present close enough that she wasn't facing it alone far enough back that it remained hers. Ray had understood that. Ray had understood most things about what people needed, which was one of the reasons losing him had left a space that nothing else had been able to fill. Cole watched Dorothy Calloway work in her garden in the morning light of an ordinary October day in Flagstaff and said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said. The Coconino County District Attorney's Office opened its formal investigation on a Thursday morning, 48 hours after Garrett Calloway drove away from the house on Juniper Street. Marcus Holt delivered the file in person. He drove to the DA's office on North San Francisco Street at 8 in the morning, carried a manila envelope that required both hands, and sat across from an investigator named Paulson, who had been with the office for 11 years and who listened for 45 minutes without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Paulson looked at the documents spread between them and said, "This is thorough." "I had good help," Marcus said. "You always did." Paulson picked up the notarization records. "Theodore Greer, I know this name. The Scottsdale development fraud. His license was pulled in August. These documents are dated September. He was operating illegally for 4 months, and he wasn't operating alone. Someone called him, someone paid him, and that someone left a financial trail." Marcus tapped the bank records. Callaway Property Solutions, Nevada LLC, registered 1 month after Raymond Callaway's funeral. The transfers are documented. Paulson nodded. "And the medical evaluation. Dr. Leonard Ashby, on medical leave since September 14th, cardiac surgery. The evaluation is dated October 3rd. He couldn't have produced it. Someone with access to his professional letterhead did it for him, and Harmon Price has a healthcare administration background and facilitated the Sunrise Ridge placement. He's the connective tissue between the financial fraud and the attempted institutionalization." Paulson set down the documents and looked at Marcus directly. "Price is already on our radar. An elder financial exploitation case out of Prescott came in 2 months ago. Different families, similar methodology." Marcus had suspected as much. He said nothing. "We'll move on Price today," Paulson said. "Callaway, do you have a location?" "East. He has a former business associate in New Mexico from the development deal that went under. If he's thinking clearly, he'll put distance between himself and Arizona before doing anything else." "If he's thinking clearly," Paulson said in the tone of a man who had spent 11 years watching people under pressure fail to think clearly, "he'll contact an attorney before he contacts anyone else." Marcus gathered his copies, stood, and shook Paulson's hand. "Call me when you have Price." "You'll hear from me." Paulson paused. "The woman, she's all right." "She's all right," Marcus said. "She's more than all right." He walked out of the DA's office into the Flagstaff morning and rode back to tell Cole. Harmon Price was arrested at his home in Scottsdale at 11:45 that same Thursday morning. Dana heard about it from her contact at the state licensing board, who heard about it from the investigator who served the warrant. Price had answered the door in a bathrobe, apparently expecting a food delivery. He had not called a lawyer. He had said a number of things to the arresting officers that his eventual attorney would spend considerable effort trying to keep out of the record. The charges were substantial elder financial exploitation forgery, operating as an unlicensed notary conspiracy to commit fraud. The DA's office moved quickly to link the Callaway case with the Prescott investigation, and by Friday afternoon, Price was in county lockup, and his records, 2 years of client files and payment histories and communications, were being systematically examined by people who would spend months working through them. Cole called Dorothy that Thursday evening. "The man from the placement agency," he said. "Price, he was arrested this morning." A pause. "For what he did here." "For that and for what he did to another family in Prescott. The DA's office is working to determine how many others there may be." The pause this time was longer. "Were there others? Were they able to help them?" "Some. The Prescott family got their money back. There may be others they can reach in time." He paused. "Your case is what opened the door to finding them. The documentation we built it gave the DA's office what they needed to move on Price and start tracing the pattern." "Then it wasn't only for me," Dorothy said. "No," Cole said. "It wasn't only for you." She said goodnight, and the line went quiet. Cole sat in his garage for a while after that, listening to the desert evening and thinking about the way things connected to other things in ways that weren't visible until you got far enough away from them to see the whole shape. Dorothy did not sleep well in the first week, but not from fear. The fear was gone, replaced by something more complicated and harder to name, something that lived in the territory between relief and recalibration. The house felt different at night without the constant, low-level dread that had inhabited it for 10 months. She had lived with that weight for so long that its absence felt strange, the way the absence of something long carried always felt when you first set it down. She moved through the rooms, carefully reacquainting herself with the spaces that had been hers and Ray's for 43 years. Not the weighted inventory-taking movement of someone cataloging what they almost lost, but something quieter and more deliberate, the movement of someone returning to themselves. She slept better by the end of the first week than she had slept in months. Not perfectly, but better. The body remembered what rest felt like when it was no longer braced against something. By the end of the first week, the tomatoes she had found in the dark were ready to harvest. She picked 3 of them on a Friday morning and ate them, standing at the kitchen sink warm from the October sun, and thought that this was one of the better moments of a year that had contained very few of them. Sylvia Pruitt came by on Tuesday and Thursday that first week. A casserole on Tuesday, a pie on Thursday, 2 hours of conversation, each visit, not about what had happened mostly, but about the neighborhood and the people they both knew, and the tree on the corner of Juniper and 3rd that the city had finally agreed to trim after 3 years of requesting. On the second Thursday, Sylvia brought her granddaughter Claire, a solemn girl of 8, who spent most of the visit examining Dorothy's bookshelves with the focused attention of someone conducting research she considered important. "She reads everything," Sylvia said, watching the girl. "Good," Dorothy said. "That's the right way to be." Before Sylvia left that day, she paused at the door. "I should have done more," she said, "when you tried to tell me what was happening. I listened to Garrett's version instead of yours, and I'm sorry." "You came to Cole," Dorothy said. "Not soon enough." "Soon enough," Dorothy said. "It turned out to be soon enough." Sylvia nodded, carrying the apology with her, even as she accepted that it had been received. She left. Dorothy watched her cross the street with Claire skipping ahead of her and felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution exactly, but movement. Things that had been stuck for a long time beginning slowly to move. The financial recovery took 3 weeks. The $12,000 in direct transfers and an additional $4,340 in smaller withdrawals, uncovered by the bank's fraud investigation, were restored in full. The Nevada LLC was flagged by the state attorney's office, and its assets became subject to recovery proceedings. The power of attorney was invalidated by the fraudulent notarization. The house on Juniper Street was formally and legally documented as the unencumbered property of Dorothy Calloway, as it had always been. Marcus Holt worked alongside a Flagstaff attorney named Gwendolyn Falk, who had spent 22 years specializing in elder law and who approached the work with the specific combination of precision and genuine anger that Dorothy found reassuring in a lawyer. Gwendolyn sat across from Dorothy in the living room on a Tuesday afternoon and walked her through each document. The power of attorney is void. The medical evaluation is void. The guardianship order is void. As of today, there is no legal instrument in existence that grants anyone other than you authority over your affairs or your property. "Good," Dorothy said. "I want to recommend that we establish legitimate documents," Gwendolyn continued. "A properly executed durable power of attorney, naming someone you actually trust. A healthcare proxy. An updated will. These are protections, not vulnerabilities." I want Cole Decker to hold the financial power of attorney, Dorothy said, and Marcus Holt and Sylvia Pruitt as witnesses to everything that gets signed. Gwendolyn wrote it down without comment. That can be arranged. Is there anything else you want to address while we're here? Yes, Dorothy said. I want to set up a fund. Gwendolyn looked up. A nonprofit, Dorothy said, funded by my estate and whatever additional support we can find. Its purpose is to provide legal representation at no cost to elderly people in Arizona who are being financially exploited by family members. People who are in the situation I was in, who don't have a Sylvia Pruitt across the street and a Cole Decker who made a promise to their husband. She paused. I have more money than I need. The house is paid off. The accounts are restored. Ray's life insurance and my pension are more than enough for whatever time I have left. And there are people out there right now in houses like mine who don't know there's anyone who can help them. Gwendolyn set down her pen. She looked at Dorothy for a moment with an expression that moved past the professional into something more direct. That is an excellent idea. I want to call it Ray's Promise Fund, Dorothy said, and I want Iron Wolves to be the outreach structure. They hear things. They move in communities where people talk around the edges of things they're afraid to say directly. They can find the people who need help before those people know how to ask for it. She looked at Gwendolyn steadily. Your firm handles the legal work. Iron Wolves finds the people who need it. That's the structure. Gwendolyn picked up her pen. Tell me how you want to organize the intake process. 6 weeks after Garrett Kenleway drove away from Juniper Street for the last time, Cole Decker arrived at 8:30 on a Saturday morning. He had called ahead not to ask permission exactly, but to give Dorothy the information that he was coming, which was a distinction that she had noticed from their first interaction, and that told her something important about the kind of person he was. He pulled into the driveway on his Road King, the engine going quiet, and came up the porch steps with his hands in his jacket pockets. Dorothy was already outside. She had been in the garden since 7, and she was sitting on the porch steps with a mug of coffee and her gardening gloves on the step beside her and a streak of good dark soil on her right forearm. Coffee's inside, she said. I made a full pot. He went in and came back out with a mug and sat on the step below her, the way he had sat on steps alongside Ray for 2 decades, and they looked out at the front yard in the morning quiet. The yard looked like itself again. The October grass had gone the dusty amber gold of Flagstaff in autumn. The rosemary along the front walk was full and fragrant, and the maple at the edge of the property had turned the deep color. It turned every fall without fail, the color that would be there next year and the year after, indifferent to whatever happened in the house behind it. Garrett crossed into New Mexico, Cole said. 4 days after everything, Marcus has a contact with the state police there. He's not hiding exactly, he's keeping his distance and trying to figure out what comes next. Is the DA looking for him? They have his information. He hasn't been formally charged yet. The investigation is still building the full picture. When they're ready to file, they'll find him. Cole turned his mug in his hands. He called Marcus 2 days ago. Dorothy looked at him. Not to threaten anyone, Cole said. He called to ask if there was an attorney he could speak to. Someone who could tell him honestly what kind of situation he was in. A pause. Marcus gave him Gwendolyn Falk's number. Gwendolyn, Dorothy said, she probably won't take him as a client conflict of interest given she's working with you, but she can refer him to someone who'll give him an honest assessment instead of telling him what he wants to hear. Did he say anything else to Marcus? Cole looked at the maple tree. He said he was sorry, that he knows it doesn't change anything, but that he wanted it said. Dorothy held her coffee mug in both hands and looked at the yard for a long time. A house finch landed on the rosemary there for 3 seconds and then gone. It doesn't change what happened, she said, but it's not nothing. Cole nodded. I was his mother when he was good, she said. That doesn't just stop. I don't know what you do with that. I don't think there's something you do with it. You just carry it. You do, Cole said. Ray would have known how to reach him. Even at the end of all this, Ray would have found the door in. She paused. I never had that with Garrett. I had other things with him, but not that. You had 30 years of breakfast, Cole said. You had the marks on the doorframe. You had 47 years of knowing who he was, the good parts and the bad parts both. That's not nothing either. Dorothy looked at him. Ray would have said that. Ray taught me most of what I know about saying the right thing, Cole said. I just say it slower and with less grace. Something moved through Dorothy's expression that was the closest thing to a smile she had produced in a long time, and it reached her eyes. They sat in the morning quiet. Down the street, someone was cutting grass. The smell of it came across in the October air, incongruous and welcome. I have something for you. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, the Iron Wolf's leather that had logged more miles than either of them could calculate, and brought out an envelope. The paper had softened at the edges and gone slightly yellow at the corners in the way that paper went when it had been carried close to a person's body for a long time. On the front, in the large forward-leaning script that Dorothy had watched signed 43 years of grocery lists and birthday cards and Christmas tags, were two words: for Dot. She looked at the handwriting for a long moment without taking the envelope. He gave it to me 14 months ago, Cole said. 11 weeks before he died. He said give it to her when she needs it most. He paused. I've been carrying it. Dorothy took the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. She turned it over once, looking at the handwriting, and felt something move through her chest that was not quite grief and not quite a relief, but lived precisely in the space between them, the specific feeling of something you thought was gone, turning out to have been waiting for the right moment to arrive. Stay, she said, please. I'm not going anywhere, Cole said. She opened the envelope carefully, the way you open something that couldn't be put back the way it was. Inside were two folded pages. The first had her name at the top. The second, and she received this with a stillness that cost her something, had Garrett's name written in the same hand. She unfolded the first page, read it through once in silence. Then she read it aloud. Dot, if you're reading this, then something went wrong after I left and Cole kept his word, which means things are getting better even if they don't feel that way yet. I have things to tell you that I should have said out loud while I still could, and I'm going to tell them to you now, even though it's too late for me to see your face when you hear them. I knew about Garrett's debt for 2 years before I died. He came to me the fall before my diagnosis, and I gave him $40,000 from my retirement account that I never told you about, and I've been ashamed of that secret every day since. Not ashamed of the money you would have told me to give it to him, and I know that. Ashamed of the secret. You deserve to know, and I kept it from you, and I'm sorry. I left nothing to Garrett in the will because I was frightened. Not angry at him, not punishing him. Frightened that more money would make things worse instead of better. I watched what happened after I gave him the $40,000, and I understood that what he needed wasn't money. I don't know what he needed. I don't think he knew either, and that is the thing I am most sorry about, that I never found the door to whatever it was. I tried. I want you to know that I tried for a long time. I just never found it. I asked Cole to watch out for you because I trust him more than I have trusted any man outside of the men I serve with, and that is saying something that anyone who has served would understand. He is not what people mean when they say family. He is better than what that word usually requires. I want you to know that I was happy. 43 years in that house with you, and I was happy. The garden, the kitchen in the morning, the chair where I used to fall asleep watching football and then deny it when you mentioned it. All of it, every ordinary piece of it. I knew how lucky I was. I want you to know that I knew. There is a second letter in this envelope. It is for Garrett. I wrote it 2 weeks after I wrote yours when I had had time to think about what I wanted to say to him. What you do with it is entirely your decision. It has always been your decision. I am not asking you to give it to him. I am not asking you not to. I am trusting you to know what is right when the time comes, if it comes, and I have trusted you on harder things than this for 43 years. I love you. I always will, wherever this goes. Ray. The front yard was quiet when Dorothy finished reading. The maple moved in a small wind. The rosemary held its scent. Cole had not moved. He sat on the step below her with his mug in his hands and looked at the yard and waited the way he had learned to wait, not because the moment required him to do anything, but because it required him to be present in it. Dorothy had cried while reading. She was aware of that without it being the most important thing happening. She looked at the second page. Garrett's name in Ray's handwriting. She held it for a long time, feeling its weight, which was greater than the paper itself could account for. Cole waited. This was one of the things Ray had known about him and had counted on Cole's understanding of the difference between being present with someone and pressing on them. He could sit beside a person in the most important moment of their life and occupy exactly the right amount of space enough that the silence felt held rather than empty, not enough to crowd the decision being made. Dorothy looked at the letter for a long time. Then she stood open the front door, walked through the house to the bedroom. Cole heard a drawer open. A pause, the drawer closing. She came back and sat on the step and picked up her coffee. "He might come back someday," she said. "I don't know if he will, but if he does, I want to have something to give him." She drank from her mug. "Ray said it was my decision, so that's mine." "That's the right decision," Cole said. "It might not matter. He may never come back." "It might not matter," Cole agreed. "And it might still be the right thing." The morning had warmed around them in the way that October mornings in Flagstaff sometimes warmed gradually, and then fully the sun coming into its strength as it cleared the mountains, making the air feel briefly like a different season. Dorothy set down her mug on the step beside her gardening gloves. "The fund is moving," she said. "Gwendolyn is filing the nonprofit paperwork this week. She thinks we can be taking cases by spring." "Marcus wants to run intake," Cole said. "People who come to Iron Wolves directly or that we hear about through the community. He does the initial conversation, assesses the situation, and passes it to Gwendolyn's network." "That's right," Dorothy said. "You find them. The lawyers help them. We'll need to get the word out. That the fund exists, that it's free, that people don't need to be afraid to reach out." "I know a woman from my years at the hospital," Dorothy said. "She runs outreach at the senior center on Beaver Street now. She knows every person in Flagstaff who should know about this." She paused. "She also knew Ray. She'll do it for the name." Cole nodded slowly. "Ray's Promise Fund," he said. "It's a good name." "It's the right name," Dorothy said. "He made a promise too, you know. Not to you, to me. 43 years ago in a church on a Saturday in June with his hair too long and his tie slightly crooked, he promised to spend his life making sure I was all right." She looked at the wolf head patch on Cole's jacket. "He kept that promise right up to the end." Cole Decker carrying an envelope in his jacket pocket for 14 months is Ray Calloway keeping his word. "I'm glad I could be part of that," Cole said. He said it simply the way certain things could only be said simply. They sat on the porch together for another hour. Sylvia Pruitt arrived at 10 with the remaining half of a coffee cake and took the wooden chair Dorothy kept on the porch for company and talked about the neighborhood and the senior center and the new family that had moved in 3 houses down, and the conversation moved in the easy, unhurried way of people who had been through something together and no longer needed to talk about it to feel its presence between them. 3 Iron Wolves came by on their bikes before 11, not at Cole's request, just riders who had heard Dorothy was doing well and wanted to see it. They stopped in the driveway and exchanged a few words with Cole and nodded to Dorothy with a respect she understood and received without needing to name it. It happened twice more before noon. She watched each group go and thought about what it meant that 55 people had gotten out of bed before dawn for her, and that some of them were still 6 weeks later finding reasons to check in. She decided that some things were bigger than what language could do with them, and that was all right. At noon, Cole stood to go. "There's a bike at the garage that's been waiting on me for 3 weeks," he said. "The owner has considerably less patience than you." Dorothy stood. She was shorter than Cole by nearly a foot. She had always had to tilt her chin up to look at the men she trusted most. And Ray had been tall too, and there was something in that fact that she didn't examine too closely because it would make her cry, and she had cried enough this morning. "Cole," she said. He looked at her. "I want you to know something, Shum," she said. "You didn't only keep Ray's promise, you kept mine. The one I made 43 years ago in that same church to stay in that house and finish what we started together. You kept me here to do that." She paused. "That's not a small thing." Cole was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man who has received something and is making room for it properly. "Ray was my brother," he said, "not by blood. The other kind, which I have always found more reliable." "He said the same about you," Dorothy said. Cole nodded once. He went down the porch steps and across the driveway to his Road King. He put on his helmet, started the engine. Dorothy stood on the porch and watched. He pulled out of the driveway onto Juniper Street, raised one hand briefly, not quite a wave, more an acknowledgement, the gesture of a man who has said what needed saying, and is now returning to his work, and then he was riding east, the engine note fading as he moved through the neighborhood toward the open road. Dorothy stood on the porch for a while after the sound was gone. The yard was quiet. The maple held its October color. The rosemary held its scent. The house behind her was solid and unchanged, and entirely hers had always been entirely hers would remain so. She thought about Ray, about the chair where he had read his newspaper, about the height marks on the doorframe, about the letter in the nightstand drawer waiting with its decision still inside it, hers to make when and if the time came. She thought about the fun that would carry his name into places they had never been together. She thought about the people it would reach, the ones in houses like this one, in kitchens like this one with someone standing behind them and a pen in their hand, and the slow patient erosion of their own certainty working against them. The ones who didn't have a Sylvia across the street. The ones who didn't have a Cole with a promise in his jacket. She went inside and refilled her coffee. She came back out and sat on the porch. The morning was warm in the particular way of October in Flagstaff, the season offering one last clear day, before it let go entirely, the sun doing everything it could with the time it had. A neighbor waved from a driveway 2 houses down. A dog barked once somewhere on the block and went quiet. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary neighborhood moving through an ordinary Saturday, unremarkable and irreplaceable. Dorothy Calloway sat in the sun on the porch of her house on Juniper Street and drank her coffee and understood that ordinary was not a consolation prize. It was not the thing you settled for when the extraordinary didn't happen. It was the extraordinary, the garden that came back when you started looking again, the tomatoes growing in the places you had stopped checking, 43 years of breakfast in a kitchen that still held the particular quality of light that made it hers and no one else's. It was the envelope in the nightstand with a decision still waiting inside it. It was the fun that would carry a good man's name forward into work he would have been proud of. It was the sound of an engine fading east, carrying a man who kept his word toward whoever needed him next. 3 blocks from Juniper Street, Cole's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. He pulled to the curb and answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older. She spoke quietly the way people spoke when they weren't entirely sure they were allowed to ask for what they needed. Is this Cole Decker? The man with the iron wolves? It is, Cole said. Someone gave me your number. A pause, a steadying breath. They said you help people in situations like mine. Cole looked back down the street. At the distance, barely visible, the amber crown of the maple at the edge of Dorothy Calloway's yard glowing in the October light. Tell me where you are, he said.